Final Fantasy VII Remake was my game of the year. Now, this game did come out in 2020. However, that being said, I do agree with a lot of other people who have critiqued the Game Awards and a lot of awards in general with gaming, that really your game of the year, it doesn't have to have come out in 2020. So in the comments down below, I'm interested to hear what was your game of the year this year. It could be Pokemon Fire Red, it could be Tetris from the 90s, or it could be something that came out this year. I'm very interested to hear that in the comments down below. And if you enjoy the video, be sure to subscribe for more content. I appreciate you very much for doing so. Final Fantasy VII Remake is one of the most heartfelt video game experiences I have ever had. And yes, I'm going to fanboy a little bit here. Now, I'm not just talking nostalgia. While I did play the original Final Fantasy VII several times through, and I do love it, I didn't play it when I was a little kid or anything like that. I'm now in my mid-20s. I played it when I was in about 10th grade for the first time, so I wasn't super young. I wouldn't say I grew up with the original game, but I encountered it in high school, played it, loved the characters, and I loved the world of Final Fantasy VII. But beyond that, I always wondered, how could a game like that be remade? How could they go back and make Final Fantasy VII Remake and make it an actual worthy successor to the original? And how would I love it so much to call it my game of the year? Final Fantasy VII Remake does one of the best jobs I have ever seen with humanizing characters, with making characters never seem like caricatures. I know there's the whole meme about how Barrett talks. Yes, that's about it. But it's very respectful to everybody it handles, and everyone that you are told or shown that has emotional connections to other characters, to the city of Midgar, to anything, you can buy it. You believe it. Cloud is not just an emo anime throwaway character that's just very generic. While he is this very downtrodden character, for sure, he actually has a lot of depth to him as well. And that's something that you find throughout the course of the whole story, is that everybody has a lot of depth to them, and you end up liking really everyone. Now, the original Final Fantasy VII did have some side characters that you never got too attached to, for the most part, because you only met them a few times, such as Jessie, Wedge, and Biggs. But this game actually fleshes those characters out completely. It lets you see who they really are, and Jessie especially is a standout character in this game. I really wished, actually, because this game does change some things from the original in the story, I actually found myself really wishing that she was a main party member that actually went along with you throughout the game. I was really disappointed that she remained a side character. I was actually hoping they'd change that, because they made me really love her that much and enjoy her company in the game. And this isn't something I find myself saying very often. I've noticed that massive RPGs, JRPGs, whatever kind of RPG we're looking at, these games often have a hard time with really making you care, or maybe it's just me, but where you actually have an emotional investment in the characters around you. Final Fantasy VII Remake is able to do that in its story with pretty much everybody. Tifa really works as this sort of girl next door character, but who is very strong. She doesn't really need your help, and she can contribute a lot. Aerith is this person that you come across who sort of shows more elements of the character that you play as well, and acts as a mirror to Cloud. You know, everybody has their purpose and their thing that they do in terms of the story. And I'm not afraid to say this game did make me cry. 100%. Now, not much makes me cry. Very sad animal stories can make me cry. Final Fantasy VII Remake apparently can make me cry. And Supernatural can make me cry. Beyond that, not much makes me cry. So that's a pretty big emotional key to hold, when it comes to me at least. When it comes to other things in this game though too, I mean, beyond just the story that I could gush about for probably 2 hours, that, by the way, did do a really good job maintaining the spirit of the original while also updating it for a modern day and not just being a straight remake. It does add more elements into the story. It deals with a lot of concepts of fate and free will and other stuff like that do make things very interesting for people who either played the original or who didn't, and it works for both. This game is appealing to newcomers and people who have been around in the Final Fantasy series forever. And for that, I really did love it. But beyond those things as well, which again, I could just keep going on about, the combat was incredible. Now, the combat is done very well. The original Final Fantasy VII was turn-based with an ATB gauge, which was essentially a time gauge. There is a time gauge in this as well, but it's real-time combat, much more close to something like, I don't know, Final Fantasy 15, or even elements of Kingdom Hearts are in here. Now, I love the modernization of the combat. Yes, I love turn-based combat, and I will always be a sucker for the original. But I think this game actually showed what Final Fantasy XIII and some other games before it wanted to be, which was this engaging experience where you get into a battle and you feel every swing, you make active choices on what you want to do, and it did use a weakness exploit system very well. So for example, when I say this, there are some bosses that are very, very resistant to attacks, but when you figure out what they are weak against, you're able to stand up to them much more in battle. Now, maybe an enemy is weak to electricity. If you don't actually mess around with those things though, and mess around with different builds where, like, say you have lightning spells equipped instead of fire, if you don't mess around with that stuff and you just try to brute force everything, you're going to have a bit of a rough time in this game. The game makes you think, even in combat, and if you fail, it's pretty much your fault. What did you do wrong? How did you not figure out how to beat the enemy? It feels challenging but not unfair. Now, there's so many more elements, again, too, with the combat that I can definitely break down in depth. If you want to see more of that, I did do a full in-depth review of Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is up on my channel. I will include that in the description and also in the end page, or end screen of this video with a link. But I loved the combat to death. When it comes to the world as well, beyond just the characters, the world did make me feel like I was living in this, not post-apocalyptic, but cyberpunkish future, near-apocalyptic, where corporations have kind of taken over everything, but it's not super preachy with it either. You have a lot of stuff in this story about the balance between nature and mankind, and progress, and destroying the planet with progress, and at what point you draw the line. There were a lot of good questions asked, but I never felt like I was sat down in a chair and preached at for hours either. This story was able to be in depth and ask questions, and sometimes even provide answers without making me feel annoyed or like I was in a church service having to listen to someone tell me something. You know what I mean? That is a big problem with a lot of stories, is that they will jam a narrative down your throat so far that by the time you're done, you don't care. Final Fantasy VII Remake is able to get you emotionally invested in those arcs and actually make you care as the story progresses and about the world that you're in. It's not just like, oh no, the world's dying. It's like, oh man, this world's really cool. How do I protect it? And the whole thing too is really that Midgar, the city that you spend pretty much this entire game in the original, you were only there for a handful of hours and then you left and you went on your merry way. Now, we know that Final Fantasy VII Remake is part one of a greater story. There is going to be a whole series of these games in this franchise, but this game was able to expand Midgar. I saw some complaints of it being too much busy work and stuff, but I really did feel like I was actually there connecting with characters and having an amazing time. For me, it worked incredibly. Now, I could definitely get into as well the soundtrack. The soundtrack is incredible. It's modernizations of an original, but there is some new stuff here as well, and it really does fit the tone of combat, of story. It emotionally enhances story beats, while also working as foreboding and foreshadowing, which, not to be credentialist, but as someone who did go into this with an actual English degree, that's something I noticed a lot in this story, is that there is tons of foreshadowing that works either for newcomers or people who have been in the series again for a long time. You will hear characters say things that you think, oh, in the original that actually meant something, maybe this will go somewhere later, and sometimes things are turned on their head, sometimes they aren't, and the fact that they're able to make it work for everyone is incredible. I love this game. I don't think I can really say anything more about it that really encapsulates how I feel about it completely. It is just such a mind-blowing experience for me in 2020. It's something I will not forget my first experience through, and I definitely want to play through several more times in my life, for sure, that I recommend to you if you haven't played it. Now, yes, there is going to be a whole series, like I said, but this is an incredible standalone game. It works very well, and the story ends on such a great note, and I am so excited for the future to see what actually, comes of this franchise. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. What was your favorite game of the year? Did you play Final Fantasy VII Remake, and what were your thoughts, or would you like to? Any of that stuff, I really do enjoy reading your comments as well, even though I don't have time to answer all of them. And I'm interested to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to subscribe for more content. Leave a like if you enjoyed it. I appreciate that very much. It always helps. And I will see you in the next one. Have a fantastic day, everyone. And as always, stay shui.